Michael Turner stood on the front porch of his old house, the same one he had built with his own hands nearly 40 years ago. The afternoon sun touched the faded paint, and he could almost hear his wife's laughter from years ago. Every brick, every creak in the wooden floor had a story. This was not just a house to him, it was a part of his soul. He remembered the day he and his late wife, Anna, moved in. They were young and hopeful, with little money but big dreams. She had filled the house with warmth, laughter, and the smell of her favorite cinnamon bread. Even after all those years, the kitchen still smelled faintly of her cooking. But now she was gone, and the silence inside the walls was heavy. Michael's only son, Ethan, visited often after Anna's death. Ethan would bring his wife, Claire, who always dressed perfectly and talked about home makeovers and business investments. At first, Michael enjoyed their company, but he often noticed how Claire's eyes scanned the house, like she was already planning changes. One afternoon, while they sat in the living room, Ethan said, "Dad, you shouldn't be here all alone. This house is too big for you." Michael smiled faintly. "It's not too big. It's just quiet now." Ethan leaned forward. "Listen, why don't you sell it to me? Claire and I have been thinking about settling here. You can still stay with us, your own room, everything the same. It'll be easier for all of us." The words sounded kind. Michael felt touched. Maybe his son truly wanted to take care of him. He thought about how hard it had been after Anna passed away. The loneliness, the quiet dinners, the long nights. Having his son close would make things better. So, after a few weeks of thinking, Michael agreed. He sold the house to Ethan for a fair price, trusting his son completely. The day they signed the papers, Ethan hugged him and said, "You'll never have to worry again, Dad. This is your home too." For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Ethan and Claire moved in, and Michael stayed in his old bedroom. They ate dinner together, watched TV, and even laughed sometimes. Claire would cook fancy meals and talk about how she planned to paint the living room a more modern color. Michael just smiled politely and said, "As long as it still feels like home." But soon things started to change. Claire's tone became sharper, her patience thinner. She complained that the house felt old-fashioned, and that Michael's belongings took up too much space. One afternoon, while Michael was fixing a squeaky door, Claire came in and said, "Dad, I think it's time we move some of your old stuff to the garage, just to make room for new furniture." Michael looked at her kindly. "All right, if it helps." He thought it was just temporary. He carried boxes of his books, tools, and Anna's old sewing machine to the garage. The garage smelled of oil and dust, but he didn't mind. Weeks passed. More of his things disappeared from the house. Photo albums, old chairs, even the clock that had hung in the living room for decades. When Michael asked, "Where's the clock?" Claire said lightly, "Oh, it didn't match the new decor." The warmth in the house faded with every change. The new furniture looked expensive but cold. The walls that once held family photos were now covered with abstract art and mirrors. Michael felt like a visitor in his own home. One night at dinner, Claire brought up another idea. "Ethan, I think we should make the guest room into an office. It'll help with your work." Ethan nodded. "That's smart." Michael glanced up. "But that's my room." Claire smiled sweetly. "Yes, Dad, but it's only for a while. We'll make the garage cozy for you. Maybe add a heater." Michael's fork froze halfway to his mouth. The garage? He wanted to protest, but he saw Ethan's uncertain eyes. His son looked tired, trapped between love and guilt. Michael didn't want to cause tension. He forced a small smile and said, "If it helps you both, that's fine." That night, Michael moved his bed into the garage. He told himself it was temporary. He even laughed softly, saying, "Anna, can you believe it? I'm back in my workshop." But when the cold air crept through the cracks and the rain tapped on the metal roof, he couldn't sleep. He missed his wife. He missed his home. Over the next few weeks, Michael noticed how quickly he was being forgotten inside his own walls. Claire hosted parties and told guests, "We bought this house last year. Isn't it charming?" She never mentioned Michael. During meals, she would talk over him, sometimes leaving him out of conversations completely. Ethan rarely looked him in the eye anymore. One evening, as Michael sat alone in the garage reading an old book, he heard laughter from inside. The family he built was laughing in his house, but he was not a part of it anymore. The sound echoed through the thin walls, each laugh cutting deeper than any insult. He turned off his small lamp, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I gave them everything. Maybe too much." In that dark, cold space, Michael realized something he had ignored for too long. Love without respect is nothing. He had given them his home, but they had taken his dignity. Still, he said nothing. He kept believing that one day they would remember who he was. The man who raised them, the man who built the house that kept them safe. But deep down, something inside him had begun to change, a quiet strength that would soon rise when they pushed him too far. And though no one knew it yet, the same man they called a burden would one day be the reason their whole world came crashing down. Michael Turner woke up to the sound of dripping water hitting a metal bucket. The old garage roof leaked whenever it rained. He pulled the blanket closer around his shoulders and looked at the small lamp beside his bed, an old desk lamp that flickered every few minutes. He used to wake up to the smell of coffee and the warmth of morning sunlight in his bedroom. Now he woke to cold air and silence. Boxes surrounded him, some filled with tools, some with memories. His late wife's sewing machine sat under a thin layer of dust. He hadn't had the heart to move it. When he walked into the kitchen that morning, Claire frowned. "Oh, Dad, could you please wipe your shoes before you come in? The floor's just been cleaned." Michael looked down at his old slippers. "Sure, I'll be careful." He cleaned them quietly and sat at the edge of the table. Ethan was already eating, reading something on his phone. Michael smiled. "Good morning, son." Ethan didn't look up. "Morning, Dad." Claire sighed. "You know, Michael, maybe you could have breakfast in the garage. It'll be easier for everyone. There's less space in here now." Michael paused, holding his cup. "Of course," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. He stood up, took his toast, and went back to the cold garage. That became his new routine: quiet mornings, lonely meals, long nights. He rarely spoke unless someone asked him something. Ethan was always busy with work, and Claire always found ways to remind him that he no longer belonged inside the house. Every evening, Michael could hear laughter from the dining room. Sometimes, Claire's friends came over. They'd talk loudly about travel, business, and how expensive life was. Michael heard his name mentioned once. "Honestly," Claire said, her voice sharp, "we're paying all the bills now. It's like having an extra mouth to feed." Someone laughed softly. "Oh, I know that feeling." Michael sat on his cot, staring at the wall, the words echoing in his head. A burden. That's what she had called him. The man who built the house, who worked 2 jobs to raise their family. Now just a burden. That night, Ethan came to the garage with a beer in his hand. "Hey, Dad," he said, pretending to smile. Michael smiled back weakly. "You're still awake?" "Yeah," Ethan muttered, sitting on a wooden crate. "Listen, Claire and I have been talking. It's getting a little crowded in the house. Maybe it's time you find a small apartment. You know, something quiet for yourself." The words hit Michael like a stone. He stared at his son, the same boy he once carried on his shoulders, the boy he taught to ride a bike, the boy who promised to take care of him when he got old. He wanted to ask, "Where did I go wrong?" But all he said was, "If that's what you want, son." Ethan looked uncomfortable. "It's not like that, Dad. It's just you'll have more privacy." Michael smiled faintly. "Yes, privacy." The next morning, he packed his clothes, a few photos, and his late wife's old locket. He didn't take much. Most of his things had already been boxed away when Claire redecorated. Before leaving, he stood in the living room one last time. The walls looked strange, white and empty. The pictures of his family were gone, replaced by abstract art. His heart felt heavy, but he said nothing. Claire appeared from the kitchen. "Are you heading out already?" Michael nodded. "Yes. Thank you for letting me stay." She smiled, but her eyes were cold. "Take care of yourself, Michael." Ethan stood behind her, avoiding his father's gaze. Michael walked out slowly. The door shut behind him with a soft click, quiet, final. The sound felt heavier than any goodbye he'd ever heard. He rented a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much: 1 room, a small kitchen, and a window that looked over an empty parking lot. But it was his. No one sighed when he walked in, no one rolled their eyes when he spoke. It was peaceful, even if it was lonely. The first few nights, he barely slept. He sat by the window, looking out at the streetlights, thinking of Anna. "You'd tell me I'm too soft," he whispered. "You'd say I should have stood up for myself." He smiled sadly. "You were always the strong one." Days turned into weeks. Michael started reading again, old books he'd kept from the garage. Sometimes he walked to the park and fed the birds, talking quietly to himself. The world had become smaller, quieter. One afternoon, he went to the grocery store. While paying, he saw Ethan and Claire outside in their car. They didn't notice him. Claire was laughing while showing Ethan something on her phone. They looked happy, carefree. Michael's chest ached, not from anger, but from something deeper. A kind of sorrow that had no name. He walked home slowly, the grocery bag heavy in his hand. Inside, he placed everything neatly in the cupboard, then sat down at the table. For the first time, he allowed himself to cry. Not loud, not angry, just quiet tears that rolled down his cheeks. He whispered, "They called me a burden, Anna. After everything we built." His voice broke. "But I'll be fine. I'll survive." That night, he sat by the window again, staring at the stars. The same stars that used to shine over the house he built. He wondered if Ethan ever looked at them and remembered his mother's stories. The ones about kindness, respect, and family. Michael wiped his tears and smiled faintly. "You know what, Anna?" he whispered. "Maybe this is how I learn who really stands by me." But deep inside, a small fire had started to burn. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter, stronger. A need for dignity. A need to remind them of what they had forgotten. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment of quiet strength would soon change everything. For him, for Ethan, and for Claire. Michael Turner's new life was quiet, almost too quiet. Every morning, he made himself a cup of black tea and sat by the window of his small apartment, watching people hurry to work. The room was simple, a small bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a single plant that leaned toward the light. He didn't have much, but at least there was peace. No one sighed when he walked in, no one told him he was in the way. Still, some nights, the silence became too heavy. He missed the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the ticking of the old clock, even the smell of the house he built. Sometimes he dreamed of Anna, his late wife, standing by the kitchen window smiling, saying softly, "Don't let them take your kindness for weakness, Michael." He always woke up with wet eyes and an empty chest. One afternoon, as he was going through a pile of old folders, he found an envelope covered in dust. It was one of those things he had grabbed in a hurry when he left the house. Out of habit, he opened it and froze. Inside were papers with his name clearly printed at the top. Property ownership document. It wasn't for the house he had sold. It was for the small piece of land right next to it. Michael blinked, reading it again carefully. He remembered now. Years ago, before Ethan was even married, he had bought that little piece of land separately to build a workshop. It was technically a different lot, registered under his name alone. When Ethan bought the house, only the main property was sold. The extra land was never transferred. He sat back, holding the papers tightly, his mind spinning. That small piece of land didn't look like much, but it connected directly to the driveway, and Ethan had once talked about building a garage and home office there. He even told Michael proudly, "It'll make the house worth double." Michael chuckled softly to himself. "Well, not anymore," he said under his breath. At first, he thought maybe he should tell Ethan. But then he remembered every insult, every cold glance, every moment they made him feel like a burden. He remembered sleeping in that garage, listening to their laughter through the walls. He whispered, "You took my home, Ethan. But you forgot one small part of it still belongs to me." Michael wasn't a cruel man. He didn't want revenge, but he believed in fairness. If they had treated him with love, he would have given them everything. But since they showed him greed, he decided it was time they learned what greed costs. The next morning, he visited a local real estate office. The agent, a cheerful woman named Sarah, looked at the papers and said, "Mr. Turner, this land is in a great location. We have a company that's been looking for space exactly like this to open a cafe. Would you consider selling?" Michael smiled. "Yes, I would." Within a few weeks, the deal was complete. The cafe company bought the land, and construction began almost immediately. Trucks arrived, workers brought tools, and walls started rising. From his bus ride to the grocery store, Michael could see it all happening, right beside his old house. Then one afternoon, his phone rang. It was Ethan. "Dad." His voice was sharp and angry. "What's going on?" "There are people building next to the house. They said they bought the land from you. What have you done?" Michael kept his voice calm. "I sold it." "You can't do that," Ethan shouted. "That's our property." "No, son," Michael said slowly. "You bought the house, not the land next to it. That land is still under my name. You never asked about it." There was a long silence. Then Ethan muttered, "You can't be serious. That's where my garage project was supposed to go." "I remember," Michael replied quietly. "You told me all about it while I was sleeping in that same garage." Ethan's breathing grew uneven. "Dad, this will ruin everything. The bank gave me a loan based on that plan. Without that land, the extension doesn't meet zoning rules." "I'm sorry to hear that," Michael said softly. "But maybe next time, You'll read the papers before you treat someone like they don't matter." Ethan hung up without another word. Days later, Michael received another call, this time from Claire. Her voice was colder than ever. "You've made a huge mistake, Michael. You've destroyed your own family." Michael sighed. "No, Claire. I just stopped letting my family destroy me." He ended the call. Weeks passed, and the construction beside the old house continued. The noise, the trucks, and the busy workers became a daily reminder that life was moving forward, just not in Ethan's favor. Eventually, the bank contacted Ethan. Without that land, his renovation project lost approval, and his loan was revoked. Debt started piling up. The bills became impossible to manage. The house, Michael's once beautiful home, fell into foreclosure. Michael heard about it through a neighbor who still spoke kindly to him. "They're selling the place," she said softly. "Your son's moving out." He just nodded. "I see." He didn't feel joy or triumph, only a strange, quiet sadness. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. Life had found a way to teach Ethan and Claire a lesson he could never have given with words. One evening, as he sat by the window sipping tea, he saw Ethan standing outside his apartment. His son looked tired, his shoulders heavy with regret. For a moment, Michael saw not the man who betrayed him, but the little boy who used to run to him with scraped knees. "Dad," Ethan said quietly when Michael opened the door. "I messed up." Michael looked at him, eyes calm, voice steady. "We all do, son. The question is whether we learn from it." Ethan lowered his head. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." Michael smiled faintly. "Forgiveness is easy. Respect, that's what takes time." They stood in silence for a long while. The sound of construction echoed faintly in the distance. The cafe being built on the land that once belonged to both of them. It was a reminder that some things can't be bought, and some mistakes can't be undone. And though Ethan didn't say it out loud, he understood. The man he had once called a burden had just taught him the biggest lesson of his life. The day the bank took the house, the air felt heavy. Michael did not go to the auction, but he walked past later, slow and quiet. A young couple stood by the gate, holding hands, smiling with nervous joy. They did not know the stories in those walls, but they looked kind. Michael wished them well in his heart and kept walking. Across the fence, workers at the new cafe were planting small trees. The scent of fresh soil and new paint floated in the air. Life was moving forward, step by step, as if the street itself had decided to start again. Michael stopped for a moment and pressed his palm to his chest. He thought of Anna. "We built something good," he whispered, "even if it ended here." That evening, a soft knock came at his small apartment. Ethan stood outside, shoulders bent, eyes red. Claire was behind him, holding a box of documents and a bag with clothes. She looked smaller than before, like the wind had pushed the pride out of her. "Dad," Ethan said, voice shaking, We don't have a place yet. Can we come in?" Michael opened the door without a word and led them to the table. He poured tea for 3. No one spoke for a while. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence. Claire swallowed. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "I was wrong. I was rude. I wanted a perfect life, and I forgot the cost of kindness. I forgot you were family." Tears filled her eyes. "I am sorry." Ethan's voice broke. "I treated you like a problem to fix. You were my father. You trusted me, and I used that trust to make myself feel strong. I am ashamed." He covered his face with both hands. "If you never forgive me, I understand." Michael watched them the way a craftsman studies wood grain, slowly, fully, with care. Then he set his cup down. "Forgiveness?" he said in a quiet voice. "Forgiveness is easy. I carried you as a baby, Ethan. There is nothing to forgive that love cannot cover." He paused. "But respect is earned again, one day at a time." They nodded like tired students hearing a hard truth. Michael took a breath. "You may stay here for a few nights," he said. "The couch is not big, but it is clean. Tomorrow, we will find you a small place. You will pay your own way. You will not lean on me to rescue you from the choices you made. But I will walk beside you." In the morning, Michael made calls. He spoke to an old friend who managed a modest building. By evening, Ethan and Claire had a tiny, sunlit studio. Nothing fancy but safe. Michael helped them carry 2 boxes and a second-hand mattress up the narrow stairs. He did not scold, he did not sigh. When they thanked him, he only said, "Start again. Start better." Days passed, then weeks. Ethan took extra shifts and began repairing furniture on weekends, the way Michael had taught him. He brought old chairs to Michael's apartment, and they sanded and glued and laughed softly over crooked legs and stubborn joints. The work made them both calmer. Wood forgives careful hands. Claire found a part-time job at the cafe built on the small piece of land that had changed their lives. She wiped tables, carried plates, and listened to stories from the elderly neighbors. Slowly, her hard edges softened. One afternoon, she came by with a paper bag. "They were closing," she said shyly, handing Michael warm bread. "They would have thrown this out. I thought you might like it." Michael smiled. "Anna used to bake bread on Sundays," he said. Claire's eyes watered. "I know," she whispered. "I read it in Ethan's old diary." On a quiet evening, Ethan sat across from Michael, hands folded. "Dad," he said, "I learned something. Power without love is cruelty. Love without respect is weakness. I had both wrong." Michael nodded. "Then you are learning the right lesson." And then came the second twist, soft, hidden, and true. One morning, a white envelope slid under Ethan and Claire's door. Inside was a receipt from the bank. A lump sum payment had cleared their most urgent debt. No name, no note, just proof that the storm had passed and they could stand without drowning. Ethan ran to Michael, breathless. "Did you?" Michael shook his head with a small smile. "A good man helped," he said. "Maybe he once carried a boy on his shoulders and remembered what promises are for." He did not say more, and Ethan did not press. Some gifts are meant to be quiet. Respect grows best in silence. Spring arrived. The young couple who bought Michael's old house invited the neighbors to a small gathering. They hung a wooden sign by the door, "Turner House," to honor the man who had built it. Michael stood at the gate, touched. The new owners had found his name written on a beam in the attic and decided to keep it. "A home should remember its maker," they said. Claire approached Michael with 2 cups of tea from the cafe. "They're training me as a shift lead," she said, surprised by her own smile. "I like listening to people. I didn't know that about myself." Ethan joined them, hands tucked in his jacket. "I'm taking evening classes," he said. "Small business accounting. Maybe one day I'll run a repair shop that doesn't depend on luck." Michael looked at them both, really looked, their humility, their effort, their slow, honest change. His chest warmed the way it once did when a new frame stood straight and true. They walked together down the street. The cafe lights glowed. Laughter drifted out with the smell of fresh bread. A sparrow landed on the fence, shook its wings, and flew again. At the corner, Ethan stopped. "Dad," he said, voice steady, "may I visit you every Sunday? No excuses, no phones. Just tea, and maybe a chair to fix." Michael's eyes shone. "Every Sunday," he said. "Bring your hands. Bring your heart." That night, in his small apartment, Michael set Anna's locket on the windowsill and opened the window to the soft night air. He spoke into the quiet. "We did not keep the house, love," he whispered. "But we kept something bigger. We kept the lesson." He closed his eyes and felt the room settle around him. Plain walls, simple table, steady clock. Not grand, not rich, but honest. A place where love and respect shared the same chair. And in that stillness, Michael understood the truth he had been walking toward all along. A house can be sold. A title can be lost. But a home, built from patience, dignity, and the courage to demand respect, cannot be taken. It can only be learned, and then given, and then lived.